Hello YouTube, today will be a quick lesson in soldering. Okay, the very first thing we're going to do with a soldering iron, which we have right here, is we're going to tin the actual tip of the soldering iron. I currently have a tip on here already. This is a 900M tip, which are pretty standard nowadays for soldering irons. You can see this one already has a coat of solder on it. This is currently, of course, turned off. I'd burn the hell out of my hand if it wasn't. But we need to always keep a layer of solder on the tip, even when it's off. This is rule number one, the absolute most important rule of a soldering iron, because if you don't keep that tip tinned, what's going to happen is it'll oxidize. And if it oxidizes, you're going to ruin a very expensive tip. So we're going to take a random tip out of the bag here, one that's preferably not used. We'll work with this one. Now it kind of looks like a little bullet, see? These are the 900M tips that are quite standard in soldering irons, unless you get like some of the other brand soldering irons. I think it's like Weller or whatever that has some of the bizarre looking tips, or even the Radio Shack ones. But for the industry and common household use, these are what you're going to probably be finding most of all. So the thing is, you want to always keep the tip tinned, which means you got to put a fresh coat of solder on there, and you always keep solder on the tip. Never ever run the tip dry, unless you're actually wiping it on the pad. And when you do that, you get the solder off, get all the gunk off, and then you apply fresh solder to it. Always make sure there's a layer on there. This is the soldering iron I'll be working with here. I said this is a Psi 1. It's a little Amazon jobby that costs like 25 bucks. It came with a little solder base. We got a sponge here. Some people swear by sponges, some people swear by the metallic pads that you brush off. I always use sponges. It's definitely a personal preference, I believe. This sponge has obviously had a better time in life than recently, so first thing we need to do is wet the sponge. So we're going to do that right now. First things first, a little squeeze. Make sure you get all the water out. You don't want this soaking wet. You just want it just slightly wet. Okay, next up is taking the soldering iron. We're going to actually put the tip on here, since this tip is the one I've been using lately for designing and building electronics. Take that off here. You can see this is the actual heating element of the soldering iron. And pull our tip out of here. This one I've been currently using. You can see they get discolored in time. It's completely normal. You're going to see, some gray stuff up there. You're going to see blue and stuff down here. As long as that tip is nice and shiny and full of solder, that's all that matters. So we're going to pop our new tip on there. And hopefully that goes on. Busy looking at the camera instead of soldering iron. I can't tell what I'm doing here. That does not want to go on, does it? Come on. Jeez. Chinesiums, or something like that. What is going on here? Is it really supposed to be like that? I guess so. Okay, well, while figuring out this tip, which is getting weird, first thing we gotta do here is flip on power supply. Wait for it to get a little bit warm. We want to tip it as the actual soldering iron is getting hot here. So what we want to do is basically just roll the solder on there until it starts melting. So it'll take a little bit. Give it a little time. Now see it's starting to melt. We want to do that over the entire tip. Sorry for the blurriness there. ahead and get that whole tip nice and get a big old solder ball on there. Nothing wrong with that. A nice solder ball on there. Go ahead and wipe it off and give it another test run. I like to get it right on the very tip too. Let it roll around a little bit. There you go. Our soldering iron is now tipped. It's wet with brand new solder, brand new tip ready to go. Alright, next thing we're going to try doing here, real quick, is soldering a wire to a component. Let's say I want to solder a lead to this high voltage capacitor right here. First of all, I'm going to show you a little trick I do. This is category 5 wire, Cat 5 wire. Yeah, you usually see this used for Ethernet, and I use it a lot for electronics. Just going to, chop off a little bit here. Say we're starting with a new piece. Take my knife and drag back on the wire so we got a nice copper end right there. Now we got 2 bits here. How are we going to connect this bit to this bit? Well, first of all, we want to take some flux, which is absolutely necessary in these situations. It's a weird consistency, gooey looking stuff. Now we can do one of 2 ways. Usually I'll just put the wire on and put flux around it, or we can dip the actual parts themselves and then wrap it around. I guess for prosperity's sake I'll just do this real quick, just because it's a little bit easier, although I'm going to have to wash my hands afterwards. Always wash your hands after using flux, by the way. So I'm just going to take that, did a little wrap around kind of ordeal here. So it kind of looks like that, let's say. Use my little holder, gonna put that part of the component down so we got an edge to hold on to here. Take my soldering iron, which is currently wetted. Let's say I currently used this a little bit ago, so not that I did, but I'm saying if I was to, once again, give it a little wipe and rejuvenate the tip. Some fresh solder. Turn up the temp here a little bit too. Currently I have the temp set to 350 Celsius. Usually keep it between 325 350 depending on the stuff I'm working with. With the lighter solder like I have here, this is a 60-40 solder, pretty common stuff. It's very light solder, so it's nice work on small circuit boards and such. So we want to take the soldering tip and the solder at the same time and touch the component in the same exact area at the same time. You don't put the solder onto the soldering tip and then onto the part. You don't put the solder onto part of the part and then soldering onto the other part of the part. That makes sense. What you want to do is you want to touch both at the same time. You want to go in with both at the same time and touch them all together at the same time. So I'm going to do that. And then you just let the soldering iron touch it for a little bit. And that's it. Now the solder is, of course, on the tip. It's going to look a little funky, so we're going to wipe that again. You especially want to wipe down any time it's a dirty part. You just got a dirty connection, and you always want to keep that float. So let's look at our part here. Got a nice snug connection right there. I don't know if the camera shows it too well, but it's a nice silvery connection. You don't want a spotty connection that looks kind of tarnished or kind of gray looking. That's what they call a bad solder joint. You want it nice and silver looking. The more silver, the better, unless you're working with solder that is lead free, in which case you're on your own, because that stuff can be kind of confusing at times. One thing I should mention real quick here is after you're done taking the component and soldering, you should take some I see propyl alcohol, just a little bit, take much at all, and take a brush, Q-tip, whatever it might be, and simply brush the lead down. You're going to get all that old gunky flux off. You don't want to leave the flux on there because the flux in time can deteriorate the actual joint, the connection. This goes the same for circuit boards. Working on any circuit boards, you definitely want to brush down the board, then give it a quick wipe with a cloth or so. Okay, last but not least, what to do before you put the soldering iron away. This might come as a surprise considering we've kept doing this throughout the entire video. Wipe the soldering tip. I know this gets really redundant, gets very annoying. That's what you gotta do. See, now it's nice and clean again. You don't want to leave the soldering tip like this, ever. If you do that, it'll oxidize. So I'm going to put a layer of solder on. Put a big old glop. Doesn't matter if it's just, like that. Maybe you can, just drop a little bit onto your soldering pad or something. But you got to leave a glop on there. Big old gloppity glop. There's a reason for this. As we already said in the beginning of the video, you want to keep a layer on there at all times. Put it back in the soldering base. Turn the soldering iron off. And there you go. All done. Now you have your part soldered too. All good to go there. Hope this little video has been instructional. First time making a video, so we'll see. Thanks for watching.